Hi everyone, and welcome back to Coachy TV. In this video today, we're going to take a look at some different cross-country races, the specific metrics that involve the actual race themselves, looking at things like the energy supply demand, where it's run in terms of somebody's VO2 max. That way, you as coaches can have a better idea of what you might need to do if you're training some of these different kids for these different races, as well as just your overall knowledge of the kid themselves and kind of what they respond to. So hopefully this will be some scientific information that you can take away from the actual race distance perspective and use to help your own situation. I am Kyle Giacono. I'm the head boys cross country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida, and I have been for the last 6 years. My credentials are on the screen there if you want to take a look. So looking at this energy continuum, these are all the paces that somebody can run from all the way to the right, very slow recovery type paces and even slower, and then all the way to the left is the fastest you can possibly go. This would be like a maximum speed drill or a stick drill or fly 30s or that kind of thing. So what we're going to look at first off is the 10K. This is primarily run more at your professional, semi-professional level and at the college men's race distance. But it is still something worth looking for, even if you're a high school coach, to kind of see what they're doing and why it might work for them in college, and vice versa. And also, if you're maybe more of a middle school type coach, why maybe college coaches are doing certain things based on their race versus what you might be doing with your kids in different race distances. So we're dealing with right here 92% of current pace VO2 max, or what they would run their 2 mile in. Maximum aerobic ability, maximum pace you can run aerobically. They're going to be running whatever that pace is. 92% of it theoretically is what you would run your 10K in if you're running the race right. Not if you're running out super fast and then dying off, but if you're running it specifically for a well-intentioned race. So let's take a look at this 10K race. First thing we're going to take a look at in all these different slides, we're going to look at a study that was done by Ingham in 2008 that's been reconfirmed over the different years that looks at the different predictors of who wins these different races. So this study finds that after looking at a whole bunch of different things, what is the number one reason why one person maybe wins a race or doesn't win a race? And they looked at everything from fat to muscle composition, leg length, maximum 400-meter pace, a whole bunch of different things. And when this study looked at the 10K, and this was looking at professional, semi-professional, all these different races over a number of years, they found that the number one win predictor was who had the best running economy was winning the 10Ks, and it was 89% of the time. Now, that's a pretty good indicator who's going to win, almost 9 out of 10 times. We'll look at some later on that are much more accurate than this, and probably the reason why this wasn't as accurate is in a 10,000, a lot of different things can happen. So even though this is the best individual metric, there's not going to be one that's perfect, especially when you're dealing with something that's 10,000 meters. So let's take a look at the race-specific VVO2 max, or what percentage you are going to be running this race if you were to compare it to your VO2 max or your 2 mile pace. This is going to be based on the USA Track and Field Distance Curriculum, what they're putting out right now. You can find that curriculum by looking online, and this is what they're saying this is actually run at right now. And this is going to be your about 92%. We covered this a minute ago. So running economy being the biggest thing. Just so you know, when you're looking at running economy, 89% of your accuracy in this model. The best way to train that is through continuous runs, either aerobic threshold or best done at tempo or lactic threshold type paces. When we look here at VO2 max being at 92%, that is a specific pace that is called critical velocity. I've spoken about this in some previous videos. And in fact, if you want to know more about lactic threshold and critical velocity, it's in the description down below. But this is going to be 92% is above or faster than your lactic threshold. So there is going to be acid accumulation in this race. Because of the relative speed of this race, there's no way you can clear all the lactate. It's just too high above the ability for your body to clear it, and it's too long. So there is going to be some accumulation of lactate. So along with teaching running economy, you're probably also going to want to do some teaching of lactic clearance, which again is also done at tempo type workout paces. Let's look at the energy supply. The event being the 10,000, you're going to get 2 to 3% of your energy demands, and these are all generalities done at race pace. 2 to 3% of the energy that the athlete's going to need is going to come from the ATP that's already sitting in their muscles before they start moving. There's always going to be ATP in every muscle. And then also the creatine phosphate, or the phosphocreatine system, which is that very fast, if you've ever heard a sprint coach say the first 6 to 7 seconds of your race is free, that's because of this energy system. It's the fastest way of resupplying ATP in your muscles, but it's very short living. So it's a little bit more important maybe in some of these other races, like your shorter races, like going down to the 800, or definitely sprint races. But there is still an impact here in the 10,000, because you would never want to just throw away 2 to 3% of any race. And then the anaerobic glycolytic system. So this is the system that lasts up to maybe 2 minutes if you're running at, say, your 400 or your 800 meter pace. It's the longer and slightly slower speed system, and it comes with accumulation of acid, and it's going to account for 8 to 12% of the energy demand in a 10K. And the aerobic supply is going to be 85 to 90%, which makes sense. As being such a long race, you're going to get most of your energy aerobically. Now, this is all based on a study done by Matter and Hartman in 2018, a very new study that is groundbreaking in that it really sort of looked at moment by moment where energy is coming from, as opposed to just where a lot of the studies were done previously to this, just measuring total lactate at the end of a race. This was actually doing it incrementally during actual events, which is much better to really see where energy is coming from overall. So there is, say, an average of 10% of the energy coming from the long speed system, and that might make somebody think that you want to really train a lot of maybe 400s and things like that. Probably not the best situation here. Probably the reason why you have almost 10% of the energy coming from this is the fact that we are running at 92%. Anything over 85%, and you're going to have a build-up importance of this energy system, but this could easily be coming through tempo type paces, as we said, running economy being the biggest thing. So there's really not a huge need to train a ton of, say, speed endurance, special endurance 1, special endurance 2 here. You can get a lot of this training from more of your tempo type runnings at this kind of distance, just because most of that percentage is really going to be coming slowly all the way throughout the 10K versus all at the end in a kick or something like that that you might see in, say, like a 1500, 1600, or 800 or something like that. So let's talk about the classic high school distance, which is the 5K. The 5K is shorter and it's run at a faster pace. This is going to be at 97%. You can see where this fits in with where the 10K is. It's a little bit shorter and a little bit faster, obviously. So let's take a look at the same study done by Ingham in 2008, and it said that the biggest win predictor for the 5K was VO2 max. Now, we said back with the 10K it was running economy and it was about 89%. Well, here with VO2 max and the 5K, it's 94.3%, an even more accurate model. Again, this is probably because as the race gets a little bit shorter, it becomes a little bit more predictable in how it's going to be run. So the biggest thing here is who had the best VO2 max, or the ability to produce energy aerobically. Now for you, if you didn't see our video series on aerobic power VO2 max workouts, they're in the description down below. But the short way of saying this is the best way to train VO2 max is 2 ways: through continuous aerobic runs, and that trains your central VO2 max, or your ability to move oxygen from your heart outward, and there's another thing that you have to train called peripheral VO2 max, which is your muscle absorbing that oxygen once it's been moved away from your center. And peripheral VO2 max, the second type we're talking about, is best trained through intervals and repetitions right at their current date pace VO2 max. This would be like your mile repeats at 2-mile pace and things like that that you've seen done quite often. Now, cross-country specific VO2 max, USATF distance curriculum says that the 5K is run right at 97% of current date pace VO2 max. That's very, very close to what's called aerobic power or VO2 max type workouts, which you would want to be more like 102 to 98%. So it's going to be a little bit slower than it, but it's pretty close to aerobic power. But it's obviously much, much higher than lactic threshold, which is 85% of your date pace VO2 max. Long way of saying the limiting factor in these races, if someone is aerobically fit, that they can obviously run an entire 5K. But if you're in shape to run a 5K, the limiting factor on these days is going to be the accumulation of acid. 97% is too high above lactic threshold. Your body is never going to be able to clear that in the race, okay? And it's too long for you to just kind of sprint out and be done with it, obviously, 3.1 miles. So you're going to have to have this ability to run right at VO2 max or aerobic power for a long period of time and have your body used to or able to better deal with having this presence of acid. And unlike the 10K, which is a little bit more able, you can clear some of the lactate because it's a little bit slower until you get later in the race, there's just no way you can clear this amount of acid that's being produced. It is going to be the limiting factor. Now, let's take a look at our energy supply here. The event, the 5K, you're going to have a little bit more reliance on the ATP creatine phosphate system simply because it's shorter, 4%. Your anaerobic glycolytic system is pretty much right in with what the 10K was, about 10%. It was a bigger range of 8 to 12% in the 10K. And aerobically, we're dealing with 86%. Again, this study done by Matter and Hartman in 2018. Obviously, most of the energy is being provided by the aerobic system. Just like the 10K, this increase, this 10% from the anaerobic glycolytic system is again because this is run right at 97%. You're going to be building acid and producing energy anaerobically. And really, it's not because of a need for any huge kick. There's obviously a kick in 5K. If you have 2 or 3 kids right together, you can see a full-blown kick. But really, this is probably coming from the fact that throughout this entire race, you just can't clear the lactate. This energy system is going to be a little bit more stressed. So as you're doing your training demand, your training schedule, just realize that a lot of this can be done through long interval type workouts, your aerobic power type workouts, as opposed to like, say, true speed, 200s, 400s, and that kind of thing. So the last race distance with cross country typically you're going to look at is the 3K, and that's run at about 100 to 102% of date pace VO2 max. In fact, a really good test of someone's VO2 max is to have them run a 3K and see what they can get. So let's look at the metrics of this race. Typically, this is obviously run more by your middle school kids. So I'm going to talk about, one, what this would mean if you were training more a high school or college level kid running a 3K, and then I'll put the caveats on what you would be doing with the middle school type kids because it's very different based on their level of development. So the 3K, the best win predictor, this is actually, put that arrow right there, this was not part of the Ingham study in 2008. It was only dealing with more of your international, professional type distances, so they were just looking at the 5K for this. But since the 5K was 94.3% accurate of who had the best winning percent, who was going to win the race, and this is a 3K is run right at VO2 max, it would probably be safe to say, if tested, that it would be at least 94.3% accurate. I would assume it would actually probably be more accurate, but I think it's safe to say it's at least as accurate as the 5K if you were to sort of think about the metrics of the race itself. So, the race-specific VO2 max USATF distance curriculum says that the 3K is run right at 100 to 102%. So, the idea here is this is run right into like what a workout you could actually be doing aerobic power workouts at this pace. The intervals and repetitions we were mentioning in the 5K, this would be a great thing to do here because this is right at that race-specific intensity here based on the USATF distance curriculum. Now let's look at the energy supply based on the study done by Matter and Hartman in 2008. This should say 3,000, not 5,000, but the numbers here are based on the 3,000. ATP creatine phosphate for the 5,000 it was 4%. For the 3,000 it's a little bit shorter. It is 5%. The anaerobic glycolytic demand is a little bit higher. In the 5K we saw that it was 10%, and here we'll see that it is 15%. A little bit shorter, a little bit faster, a little bit more reliant on this long speed system. And then aerobically, you're going to get 80% of your energy from your aerobic system. Now, that makes perfect sense. Again, this is a very long distance race. You're dealing with somewhere between maybe, about 9 to 10 minutes if you're dealing with good high school or college level athletes. You get in the 8 minutes too, so it's a longer race. You're going to get a lot of the energy this way. But there is more of a supply here from this long speed system and a little bit more of a supply from this ATP creatine phosphate system. This would mean you probably do need to have an increased importance if you're dealing with a high school or college level athlete on a little bit more speed. Not a ton, but you might want to stimulate this anaerobic glycolytic system a little bit more through things like intervals at, say, 400 meter pace or that kind of thing, because you want to have a little bit stronger anaerobic glycolytic system. Not a ton, just a little bit. Now, that would be for more of a college level kid. The idea here is if you're dealing with a middle school athletes, you're probably not going to want to do a ton of intervals at that intensity because at that age, they're really not going to respond well to any acid producing workout. Even aerobic power or intervals right at their date pace VO2 max aren't really good for middle school athletes until you get to about 14, 15, and definitely like 16. The human body is not good at dealing with acid. It just really hurts the central nervous system and the muscles a whole lot more. This is why if you've ever had a kid that maybe was very, very talented, maybe they could run a very, very good 5K or a 2 mile. There's a kid in my own training scheme right now he's just finished his sophomore year, but even his freshman year, he was low tens in, say, a 2 mile. But for some reason, when we would do these workouts, he just really would not do nearly as well on, say, mile repeats. I had to adjust things for him as a 14, 15-year-old, where maybe I would give him intervals at thousands, or I might even not have to be able to give him an interval workout that day because he just can't quite handle it. So if you're a middle school coach, even though you might see these numbers as 15% anaerobic glycolytic, 5% from this creatine phosphate, and only 80% from the aerobic system, which is still, by the way, the most. If you're a middle school coach, you're probably going to get most of your workouts in the aerobic zone. You're going to do a lot more of your continuous runs. You could do some fly 30s. Actually, kids at that age respond really well to very short and fast. But anything in this long speed system, you're probably going to want to avoid. And even long intervals at aerobic power or VO2 max, which would be run at this intensity, your 2 mile pace intervals, like your mile repeats, your thousands, your 1200s, that kind of thing, really are not all that appropriate for kids in the middle school distance. So since this race is typically run in cross country by middle schoolers, I would say you might even want to use a similar training demand that you might have heard me speak about earlier in this video in terms of the 10K, where you're going to want a lot more continuous type runs in order to get the energy supply. So that's just some of the ideas of the metrics behind different cross-country races. Hopefully they give you a better idea of what it takes to win these races, what level of their VO2 max it's run at, and the specific energy demands that come from these different races. In the next day or two, I'll release a video that does the same thing with the different track events from the 800, 1500, and 3000, 3200. So stay tuned for that. If you liked the video, maybe think about liking or subscribing down below. If you had any questions on anything I went over or have a suggestion for a video that maybe I can do, please leave that in the comments down below. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.